Good morning and happy Mother's Day to those of you who are moms.
Really interesting. I'm led by.
I felt like I had, you're fine. I just sort of mumbled a little bit, but you're good. I felt like I kind of cheated because I got a cup of chocolates and I'm not a mom, but I was really happy to have the chocolates and I did share them with my mom friend here. So that's,
You're a grandma, so.
yeah, I think I've raised about 8,000 kids over the course of my career, but
Yes.
at any rate. Well, today we are going into Ecclesiastes, which I hadn't spent a whole lot of time in before. And about the best I knew about Ecclesiastes was there's a time for all things, which I always kind of liked until I read a little more today. And we'll talk about that. This is a gosh dang depressing book. I mean, it is really, you just kind of want to slap this guy silly because he is so depressed about absolutely everything. But as the author of the book that I've been using as a text sort of reminded me, he didn't have the advantage of knowing what we know. And this is what a lot of people in the Old Testament world were struggling with. They didn't know what was coming next in the New Testament and where they could put their hope. Curtis's sermon this morning, just believe in me, put your trust in me, and we can move forward. So hopefully we'll keep that in the back of our minds as we wander with this poor, depressed, dismal person through Ecclesiastes. So I'm not going to even try to do the Bible Project anymore. It just gets us in trouble. But the link is here, so if you want to go back and take a look at it when you see the online link, you're welcome to do that. But a lot of this talks about what really matters, what's really important to us. What is it that we strive to find? I don't really care if you serve me chicken or beef for lunch. As long as you give me lunch, I'm happy. I don't really care if the car radio is turned to classic or country because I rarely have my radio on, which is weird because most people live by their radio. I like silence somehow in my car. I don't care if my purse and my shoes coordinate in color. Although when I was hanging out with Mr. Avant, that was really important because he was the artist. And I had one pair of shoes and one purse before I met Jim, and now I've got a gazillion of both. And I wear one pair of shoes and one purse. But anyway, but I do care if the driver next to me stays in his lane. And I don't know about you, but it seems to me like more and more drivers are having difficulty doing that in Wichita, Kansas. I do care if the pathology report that's been done on my body comes back positive or negative. That's important to me. And I'm kind of concerned about if I'm going to make a purchase that it's something that I can afford. $100 looks a little better than $10,000. I just renewed my basketball tickets for WSU and upped my scholarship donation so I could get my parking pass back. And I choked a little bit when I put that on my credit card because it seems to get more and more every year. But there are things that matter to each of us, and there are things that we can sort of say, yeah, I'm okay whichever direction that goes. So there's a dilemma in Ecclesiastes, a pretty big one. And it seems that it can confuse us more than it informs us. It raises a lot of questions, and it doesn't provide very good answers to those questions. It argues against simple explanations, and it sort of rejects the suggestions that God's actions in the world are predictable because this poor guy doesn't get much of anything that's going on. And the book sort of suggests that rather than God's ways being hidden from us, they're just simply unknowable. We can't figure them out. We can't get much. We know he's active in the world, but so much of what he does is unexplained and beyond finding out. This character seems to really struggle with that concept. Eric loaned me at the beginning of this class time because if you remember, the author of the book that I'm using tries to tie these wisdom books back to Jesus. And I was having a little trouble doing that. So Eric bought a new Bible that he gave me. He hadn't even read yet, so what a generous man he was, called the Jesus-Centered Bible, which helped bring those things back to a little better sense for me in terms of how to tie Jesus into the wisdom books. But from this, the introduction to Ecclesiastes in this Bible, the writer says, Ecclesiastes presents a sobering picture of life. We don't get to pick anything. We don't get to pick our looks, our parents, our IQ, our temperament, our birthplace, our relatives. In the world, we see people randomly slotted into places. Some are in wealth, some are in poverty, some have good health, some have disease. And our basic question is, who, if anybody, is in charge here? How's that happening? How is this working out? And we know with certainty that it's not us, because if it was us, we'd make this world be a little better, right? And yet, the writer in this Bible introduction says, we're innately driven to search for happiness, fulfillment, and belonging. Each day we dress and leave our house to pursue a greater sense of fulfillment. How do we come to terms with the collision between our need to love and be known with the world's impediments that seem to get in our way of that dream? As Curtis was giving our lesson this morning, I was thinking about our lesson here today and how those tie together. That sense of just tell me what to do and we'll do it to make sure we've got plenty of bread. And I think that's what Ecclesiastes and the preacher in Ecclesiastes is struggling with. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do so I can be happy and fulfilled. So in this book, we're really hearing two different voices. We hear the narrator's voice at the beginning and at the end of the book. And his beginning is to try to give us some introduction to what we're going to think about. The ending is his summary and points the other voice back to where he needs to be. So the preacher, the teacher, Koheleth, I think I'm saying this correctly, I don't know. Wasn't a word I'd seen before, and I wondered if somebody just made it up to put it in a book. But this person is the voice in the rest of the book. And there seems to be some debate among scholars as to who this voice really belongs to. Is it King Solomon, who we ascribe most of the Proverbs that we just talked about last week to? Is it somebody else who's trying to present themselves as a Solomon-like character? Nobody seems to know for sure who this Koheleth actually is. But I'm going to read to you the first few verses of Ecclesiastes from this Jesus-centered Bible and think about the imagery that this writer is using. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south, then turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new, but actually it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. Well, isn't that just pleasant? So, what were some of the imagery that he used?
Water flowing and recirculating.
Yeah, the water just going around. We had a lot of rain, obviously, last weekend. My sump pump was just going crazy. And I think I live above a spring that has a little trouble. But I thought, this is not right. Well, I went out, and the the discharge hose from the sump pump had come undone. So it was just kind of, the water was going and it was coming and it was going and it was coming. So I had a real sense of that one this week. What else did you hear in this?
The sun goes up and sun goes down.
Yep, goes up and it goes down, never changes. The winds blow one direction, then they circle around and blow the other direction. We know that around here too, don't we? So what do you think this narrator is assuming about life? What's he trying to say?
Well, I'm thinking that it seems like there's no change to this person, but in reality, I guess in the modern day, we know that things do change over time, but it's sometimes such a long epoch of time that we don't see. It's kind of like when you see the same person every day for 2 years versus someone who sees that person once and then 2 years later sees them again. Oh, they're really different than they were 2 years ago, but if you see them every day, they're the same person.
Well, and this guy is,
I'm not sure how to put that in with this.
well, I think this narrator is saying there's nothing new under the sun, and we're going to hear that phrase a lot in Ecclesiastes. So various translations use the word vanity or folly, where we just heard meaningless. So do these words differ in any way, do you think? Vanity, folly, meaningless.
I can't remember what the letters stand for, CEVDCI version. I think it's the current English version. Says nonsense. Everything is nonsense. Nothing makes sense. But if I'm remembering from the Bible Project's videos, the word there is vapor.
Mm-hmm.
That it's this, life is like this mist. You know, you can't actually see it. You can't grab it. It morphs, it changes. It doesn't have a structure to it. That's the idea.
Yeah, and you remember absolutely correctly, it is vapor. That you think you can reach out and grab it and there's nothing there to hold on to. So there's just this sense of nothing is making sense. Everything seems to be difficult. So Qoheleth, that's how I'm going to say it, whether it's right or not, asks a lot of questions. He can see some wisdom. He's not totally without the ability to see some things going on around him. But he's got a lot of questions about the world and about the life he's living. And maybe some of these questions might resonate with you. So let's start looking at some of them. His first is, does anything last? And he starts by saying, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So, it doesn't appear to him that anything, although everything stays the same in many ways, there doesn't seem to be anything that you can rely on or put your hands around or make sense of. He says, does anything satisfy? Ecclesiastes 2:1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this was also vanity. Qoheleth became sort of an experimental hedonist, if you will. He tried thinking that pleasure held out a promise that he would be fulfilled. So he did everything he could to make himself happy. And that didn't seem to work. Then he threw himself into work. And that seemed to get him nowhere either. So earthly things, at least to this teacher, appear to offer no satisfaction. Is anyone in control? And here's the passage that most of us are familiar with out of Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stories and a time to gather stones. That was to scatter stones and gather stones. Time to embrace and a time to turn away. A time to search and a time to quit searching. A time to long and a time to throw away. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Could all of you hear that song in your head? Da, 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 da. Yeah. I always liked that song. I thought it pretty powerful. I thought it was really a nice way to look at the world around us. And this teacher is saying that God's appointed these times, whether we like it or not. We're going to have to deal with it. It's not like that lovely folk song that sets us at ease, but in reality, it calls you to submit to God's sovereignty over time and events. And apparently he doesn't like that. He seems to be saying that God has already determined the end from the beginning, and nobody can find it out. So we're all just kind of out here waiting for these times that God has preordained to occur. Well, that doesn't sound as nice as that folk song always sounded to me. Thoughts about that? So the answer to that question is, yeah, there's somebody in control, but I don't think the narrator or the teacher particularly likes the control that's being offered at that moment in time.
And I'm not sure, Julie, that is, I'm not sure that those verses, sometimes we get the feeling in those verses, well, life is going on and there's nothing we can do about it and it's just going to be what it's going to be. And so let's just, someone else is in charge and someone else is in control, so it's just what it is. But we also know that prayer can change things. We also know that God at times relents from something that he was going to do. We know that God listens to prayer. And so to take a fatalist attitude, I guess, that's what those verses say to me, and that's probably the wrong interpretation. But I like to think that my prayer means something if I ask for peace or if I ask for something else, all of that's going to happen in the world itself over time. There's going to be times when those things happen. But I think that I and others who pray and serve can affect those times and those events. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I agree with you completely. But you have a wisdom that this guy didn't have, right?
Or he didn't have at the beginning of his writing.
Right.
He comes back around.
He comes back around, not totally, but he comes back around.
The writer of Ecclesiastes, when you look at Proverbs, especially when you get to the little pithy sayings, right? We want to look at Proverbs as promises, and they are not. They are kind of rule of thumb here. This is what tends to happen. If you do this, this happens, etc. And Ecclesiastes looks back and goes, well, not always, and points out these rules of thumb. I can show you so many exceptions to rule. So, who is in charge? When you said that, we were flying for one of the first times ever when I was little, and I had a younger brother, and we got on the plane in the middle of the night, and we couldn't sit together. So it was mom and 3 kids spaced out. And all of a sudden, my little brother, who's about 5, yells out, "Hey, Mom!" And I mean, everybody's asleep. Right? And Mother's like, "Shh, who's driving this thing?" Because he could not see see anybody that had a wheel or anything else. It was just a lot of people asleep. And I sometimes, and you know, if you watched an airplane, sometimes it does not seem to make sense the direction that they're taking, because they're going to head north, but they pull out of that airport, heading south, and then they get back. And if you travel across the ocean, right, you should be going, and we don't, we loop way up, because actually it's shorter to make an arc than it is to go straight. But if you're not a pilot, that doesn't seem to make sense. So there's an awful lot in life that it doesn't make sense, and the reason it doesn't make sense is because I'm not a pilot.
Yeah.
You know, the author of this is actually pretty wise. How many of us have started reading books and went to the end to see what happens before we finished? And if we do that with this book, then what we're reading before we get to the end maybe doesn't have as much meaning, because he does in the end say what's really important. And if we carry that with us through there, then it may not have the impact of us scratching our head about what's going on here. And you mentioned in chapter 3, you know, it's time for anything. If you read on down, he gives you a little glimpse of what you should be picking out of this when he talks about, you know, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of justice, wickedness was there. And he said, I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. And so, even though everything seems meaningless, every deed is going to be judged. And so he gives us little glimpses of things, even though everything, you know, we don't know everything and see everything that's happening, and we don't understand it all, but God does. And everyone's going to have to stand up. And he gives us the conclusion of his thoughts at the end, instead of the beginning.
Right.
And I think that's kind of...
And you're kind of slogging through with him through this book going, come on, I know you can get there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I used to do that with books. I'd start and not be sure, especially in mystery. And I'd read at the end and see if then I could figure out how they were going to get there, until they started putting the first chapter of the next book by that author at the end. And I'm like, who are these characters and where did they come from? I'm not getting this. So I was as confused as this guy by trying to do that. So I think when I read A Time for All Things, it was always reassuring to me. I didn't feel like it was random, but there's this and there's this, and there's this and there's this. And we're going to find it all, and we're going to be reassured by that. But it does call us to be willing to say, somebody other than me is going to make that plan, and we're going to follow it as it occurs. Is there any comfort? Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. So this, not the narrator, the preacher seems to ask what or who can relieve the misery caused by this oppression and envy and loneliness that doesn't seem to find a way to get fulfilled. No matter what he does, he's not seeing happiness or comfort come out of that. Does anyone dare draw near? So now we're starting to see him say, I know I'm in this depressing situation, but here's a potential solution that might be helpful. Here's a way I can maybe look ahead and see what we're going to do. So Ecclesiastes 5, 1 through 2. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near, to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of the fool, for they do not know what they are doing, that they are doing evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, not let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God, For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Good advice, but you don't get a real sense of intimacy here, of being able to draw close, or that even doing this is going to be satisfying. It's just do this and hope that you'll be heard in some ways. Is anything gained? He seems to be suggesting that there may be a possibility that there is something to be gained in having wealth to enjoy this life under the sun. What does that mean to you, life under the sun? He uses that phrase multiple times in the book of Ecclesiastes. Under the sun. What does that mean to you?
On this planet as we know it.
Yeah, so something's going on in this world, and we're part of that life that exists under the sun. But then the Qoheleth begins to recognize that no matter how much money he has, it doesn't seem to be enough. Kind of like this morning, no matter how much bread you have, it doesn't seem to be enough. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied.
Julie, some years ago, a lot of years ago, I was listening to Jeff Walling, some of you may know who that is, with one of his talks to the youth, wherever it was, I don't remember now. And Jeff had a thing just about this, no matter how much money a person has, it doesn't seem to be enough. What he said was, he said, suppose that you are sitting here and someone is right in front of you, and once every second, that person gives you a $100 bill, free. Every second, you get a $100 bill. Every second, you get a $100 bill. Every second, you get a $100 bill. And his question was, when are you going to tell him to stop?
Good point.
When are you going to tell him to stop? I have enough. Mm-hmm. My guess is most people in this room, if they really thought about it, would say, well, no, I can take another one. Well, I'll just wait another couple of minutes yet. Well, I could do this all day. And so,
But I'll do good things with it.
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, and the point is that we all have that sense of it's not enough.
Yeah.
I think someone once asked John D. Rockefeller how much money he needed, and he said, I just need $1 more.
Yeah. Well, if I had what he had, $1 more might have been sufficient.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
But don't we all pursue that? Just one more step, just one more. I'll admit I have sort of an addiction to a couple games on my phone. And when I wake up in the morning, I kind of go through those. Lori and I play Words with Friends, do quite a few of those things. And I think, okay, just one more, and then I'll stop. And then 30 minutes later, I'm still just one more. So we don't ever seem to get satiated. We don't ever seem to find that end point that makes us satisfied without some other things.
Reading an article in Christianity Today, Julie, not too long ago, about finances and churches. This is not personal finance, but it's church finance. And what the person, we went through a bunch of stuff, and then what he said at the end was, however much God chooses to give to your church, that's enough. No matter what your budget is, no matter what your situation is, it's God that is giving you whatever it is he's giving you, and that is enough.
And
I find that as someone who kind of helps to manage the money here, I find that kind of difficult to accept at times.
But yet, hasn't it played out almost every time?
It has played out. It has played out pretty much every time. What I find difficult is the part about whatever God chooses to give. No, I put money in the collection plate. God doesn't do that. No, now wait a minute here. Where does this ultimately come
Exactly,
from?
exactly. Yeah, I am always, and I don't know why I continue to be so amazed when we have those special offerings with the white envelope box, the generosity of this church. I mean, it is amazing to me, and yet it happens time after time after time after time. So clearly, what we're given is what we can use and use well. That's going to take me on a segue, and I'll come back. I have time. I didn't play the Bible Project. After church last Sunday, I was going to the art museum to help with their book sale at the art museum. I volunteered in the afternoon. And because of the race, I couldn't figure out how I was gonna get there exactly. And I needed something to eat before I went, so I went to the McDonald's on North Broadway. Hadn't been there for a while. Interesting McDonald's. So I'm in the drive-thru and they've taken my order and I need to pull ahead because apparently they needed to finish the French fries or something. So I pull up and here is a gentleman standing by that railing by the door who clearly is a homeless gentleman, probably a little bit on the mentally ill side. And he and I began to have a conversation because my window's down and we're talking. So he's assuring me he is not panhandling. There's nothing panhandling about him. But he's a veteran and his tooth hurts and this. And so I said to him, when was the last time you ate? I'm not panhandling, I'm not panhandling. So when my food came, I just kind of wanted to give it to him, but I took my food, but I gave the young man who brought me my food $10 to give to this gentleman. And I think the kid thought it was his tip. I was like, no, it goes to him. Oh, I wasn't panhandling, ma'am, but thank you. So then I'm sharing that story with somebody a little bit later, and I'm told that I could have been arrested for facilitating panhandling, even though he wasn't panhandling in his mind. But the fact that I gave money to this gentleman is apparently not the right thing to do. And if a policeman had seen me, I could have been arrested, which made me go, dang, you finally do a good act. And now I'm told that probably wasn't the right thing to do. So I'm going to explore that with our friend David Wirtz and see if that's indeed true. It's a new law.
I think technically that's correct, but I think it's virtually unenforceable.
And
Because is it panhandling if I meet somebody at the Quick Trip and put gas in their vehicle for them? Which I do regularly.
I know you do.
For the church.
Yeah.
You know, and there's other.
Sure.
And it's kind of like other laws, it's their way of instead of dealing with the situation,
Yeah.
they deal with the people who conform to the laws.
Well,
To handle the situation.
that may,
Instead of getting the panhandler off the corner, they're gonna find people who create him standing there,
Yeah.
thinking they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
well, that may be one rule I continue to break. We'll see how that goes. So now Koholeth is asking us this: is there any hope? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which passes like a shadow? For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? If life under the sun is all there is, then death must be better than such meaningless futility. But our preacher doesn't seem to have any sense of knowing what awaits him, where he's going to end up, what's going to happen to him next. Does anyone know? We know he's gained some wisdom, but there are so many things that he can't figure out. So many things that he decides are simply beyond knowing. If he can't figure these things out, then nobody must. Too many things don't make sense to him. Is this all there is? He seems to believe that being God's chosen people in covenant with him gets you absolutely nowhere. Not a zilch, zip, whatever. You live and die in this world just like everybody else. So the preacher says, go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that's all you get. That's your portion in life. Vanities of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. We're getting into this book. Chapter 12 is kind of the end. So he's still struggling with some of this. What is this that I'm supposed to deal with under the sun? And how am I supposed to deal with it? So the narrator, and I'll read his closing comments in just a moment, seems to believe that this guy has written himself out of a job by showing the futility of wisdom sought under the sun. While he's shown many wise things, many things are true about the world, his wisdom that he's gained can't take us any further, and it doesn't take us far enough. So let's listen to what the narrator concludes this chapter with. Keep this in mind. The teacher was considered wise, and he taught the people everything he knew. He listened carefully to many proverbs, studying and classifying them. The teacher sought to find just the right words to explain truths clearly. The words of the wise are like cattle prods, painful but helpful. Their collected sayings are like a nail-studded stick with which a shepherd drives the sheep. But, my child, let me give you some further advice. Be careful, for writing books is endless, and much study wears you out. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad, as you have mentioned. So if we were to go back and answer those questions that were asked based on knowing Jesus, how would we answer them? Do we dare draw near?
I didn't hear what you said.
Do we dare draw near? How would we answer that question, knowing Jesus?
We can, because his righteousness covers.
Exactly. Is that all there is? No. Yeah. Is there nothing to be gained? If we go back and look at those questions from our knowledge base and our wisdom, we can see a very different answer, and probably less of a dilemma than the narrator, I'm confusing these two, the teacher has shared. So the narrator seems to be saying we don't need more people writing about wisdom. We've got that. But we need to embody God's wisdom. We need to know what it is that he's asking of us. And what we need is a new kind of a revelation, one that will enter into this life under the sun and transform it and transform us. And what we need is wisdom that comes from heaven, not from under the sun. The author of the text that I'm using says sometimes we need to go over the moon as opposed to under the sun to see what the realities are that we're thinking about and how we might want to move forward with that.
You know, Julie, it was all throughout this time here in this class today, all those questions that were coming through and all of the seeming negativity that was in there, one phrase has kept going over and over in my head, and it may be only good for me and not for anybody else, but the phrase that kept coming at me is, taking off from what I said with gifts of gratitude, is listen to the birds with gratefulness. Mm-hmm. Listen to the birds with gratitude. There's a time for everything. You may not have much control of things. You know, all of those questions. And it just kept over and over. Listen to the birds and be grateful. Mm-hmm. For me, I think that works in answering these questions. It may not work for everyone, but I think it works for me.
And that makes good sense, doesn't it?
And, you know, The other thing I see is, as I look through here, I was just looking at something in chapter 6, and the thing in verse, like in chapter 6, verse 11, it says, the more words, the less the meaning. And for me, what instantly came to my mind was the New Testament, where they talked about the publican saying, forgive me, God, for I'm a sinner. And then you have the Pharisee saying, dear Lord, I'm thankful I'm not like that publican over there, and I do this and I do that. And I'm thinking, and then they ask the question, which one, was worshiping God? And which one went home being righteous? And so, and so those kind of things that I also pick out of here, because, to me, that's something that's part of teaching. It's not the words you say, but, and that's something that I also see in this. And that's just, I don't know. So, and that's why I like classes like this, is because everyone gets a different perspective of what they see, and the more people share, the more people can enjoy the living word, and that.
The more we
Because
share.
it lives and speaks to each of us at different levels and in different ways.
We all get that cattle prod in a little different way, don't we?
Yeah.
And I too value the opportunity to share that and to think about it and to talk about it.
That verse makes me think of listening to philosophers and people discuss philosophy, and it's just, I find it meaningless. I mean, I've got this view, you've got this view, and it's words and words and words and more words.
I taught a freshman success class when I first started teaching in Indiana, and I was paired with a philosophy faculty member. And we're talking about freshmen in college who were in a freshman success class, which would suggest to you that they probably needed some development. And we're talking about Plato's cave and all, and I'm like, ooh, we need to narrow that back in here, bud, and get to the place where, right, we need more than words. We need the embodiment of the actions that we're looking at. So do you think that the book of Ecclesiastes points us toward God ultimately and prepares us for Christ? Certainly seems to, doesn't it? We can wander in that wilderness as long as we wish, but we know that we have an opportunity to move forward with someone who has enough grace to sustain us, enough love to support us, and enough was willing to take our sin so that we might live with him. So next week, we're getting to the Song of Solomon, the last of the wisdom books. And I may be tiptoeing through that book a little bit. We'll see how that goes. But I'd appreciate it if you could read through the book before we get to class. That will be our last class together. It's been an interesting 10 weeks or so for me, and thank you for making it as enjoyable as it has been. So, see you next week.